recording started, and I'm going to go ahead and do the change presenter.
Excellent. Excellent. Um, should we, for all discussion by text, should we use the questions panel?
I find generally it's a little easier if if the question's pretty straightforward, people put it in the question box, and then if I find that I would make a hash of it, I'll sometimes ask them to just ask verbally. But generally, the question box seems to work well, and I think Steve said that he's picked up a couple of questions from the class. So I think, yeah, I would definitely encourage you
Made a
to
presenter. I can
encourage
show my
people
screen.
to type.
Oh,
Yes,
man.
and you do get to show your screen. Yes. Okay, so I did
Oh,
a change presenter. Now, do you have the keyboard and mouse?
yes, I have both. I have a real computer.
I mean, do you have the function of the keyboard and the mouse?
Well, that too.
Okay,
I have the hardware and I have the software.
good. I see. Looks like your task manager's open and you're getting your screen in place.
You're right.
All
You're
right,
right.
so
Yeah.
I'm going to take my hands off the machine and enjoy the show. Thank you for joining us tonight, Brian.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And Michelle, I assume you'll be monitoring the chat box so we can throw tech questions at you?
Sure, I can do that.
Great, great. Now, if there's some people on the attendees pane, next to their name is a question mark. It means it has unanswered question. How do I find that question?
Well, that's what I'm starting to wonder. I can see the question box, but apparently you can't. So they also get, when they post a comment, thank you for the case study, like so, yes, nice and clear from Will. They show up as questions, even though they're just chatty comments. So
I like the chatty comments. I just can't see any of
I
them.
know it. Yeah.
Can you see the pane in on my screen right now?
I can see your Google Signs deal
Yeah, but
with
you can't see
sensors
the.
in your, I can see that, but what else do you want me to see?
All right. Well, you cannot see the control panel for the Citrix itself. It doesn't launch itself. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm looking at a panel that's just called Chat, and it has nothing in it but the question I just put in.
And
Is
I
there?
can't see that.
And I
Wow,
can't, yeah.
that's borked.
Mhm.
Okay, that sends the. Let's see. There's send chat to organizers and panelists only. Same question to staff. I'll twig it to organizers and panelists only. There should just be a single chat box. That would be a lot easier.
You would think. Hmm.
I find a lot of video conferencing platforms, I don't know what you guys think about those, students, but a lot of them seem pretty nervous about chat. Tools like LifeSize actually block chat, and
Hmm.
even venerable Google Hangout pushes chat to one side, so it's hard to find.
Hmm.
Okay, there are 4 questions. Julia, Wanda, William, and William each have questions.
Oh, good. So
And
you're seeing the
I can't
marker
see
or
them.
you're seeing the questions?
I'm seeing the marker in the attendees panel.
Right. So none of those are actual questions. Julia Payne is the last one in, and she says she can't see anyone's questions either. So um, the
Yeah.
questions come into mine because I opened the session, and I will be happy to share them with you. We'll do it that way.
And I
Okay.
can't see them either, Michelle.
Right.
So if
Yeah.
if you can do that, that's
Yeah, I'm
great.
happy to
Thank
do
you.
that. Hmm.
Will you share them out loud or will you
I
share
will
them via text?
absolutely. I will say, Brian, I'm going to interrupt you right now. Here's a question from.
And you
Yeah.
just did that.
Uh-huh.
Well, to get started, since we've got that workaround in place, do you guys want to say a few things about the class where we're at tonight, or should I just take over?
Why don't you start out, and we'll go from there.
You meaning me.
You, Brian.
Okay. Well, greetings, everyone. I'm looking at a list of about 19 attendees, which means about 18 of you guys are students. And that's Alex, Brandy, Carol, Charlie, Corley, Gina, Giselle, Jasmine, Juanita, Yulia, Kevin, et al. I'm really glad to see all of you guys here. Or at least to see your names here, and hopefully I'll get to hear your voices and at least hear recordings or reportage of your questions. I'm glad to be here for a few reasons. One is it's always good to be in the class space again, and the second is I'm doing a lot of work on the future of higher education, and so finding out what you guys think is actually very practical and very useful for me. What I have on the screen here is Twitter through a client called TweetDeck, which I'm very fond of. And I'm putting that there to emphasize a couple of points. One is just the omnipresence of social media. If the old saying used to be, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. I think the same is true with social media, that especially in education, if we don't pay attention to it, it nevertheless works around us and through us. And we need to have that in mind. We need to work with it. So I have it here as a kind of back channel so that I can, in case it wants to use it to talk, we can see that here and include it. I mean, I'm presenting it so you can see it, which is interesting. In a face-to-face class, you can often do this with a projector and maybe a second window. But I think at least an instructor should at least bear in mind this is happening. And Brandy gets the award for the first person to ping me on Twitter. I'm glad you could do that. I'm also a dog lover, but I can't help you with Miami. The second reason is just to point out this. We have an inherited notion of academic privacy, that a lot of our work happens behind closed doors. In the face-to-face classroom, we close the door and it becomes a private space. In the online universe, you use a course management system, and it creates this sense that it's a locked away space that only the instructor, support staff, and students can know. In academia research, when we present, we have all kinds of levels of secrecy and privacy. But as you can see here, and thanks to Susan Mosher for joining, we have no real sense of that kind of privacy anymore. I don't mean to say that as a gloomy way, tolling the bell for the end of privacy. What I mean is that learning in academia is now something that's done out loud in public in the world. And we have to really rethink what this means for curricula, what it means for pedagogy, what it means for research, scholarship, support, what it means for our careers individually. So that's why I put this here. If you have you guys, do you know who I am? Have you looked at what I do, or should I explain myself?
Hi, Brian. It's Steve. If you could just maybe go through your background, you can
Sure.
maybe help us understand some of the places that you're coming from. I know that you write a blog and you're an editor of a periodical, which is great and really deals exactly with many of the topics that we're studying this summer about the future of education and with technology.
Great.
So it's
I'll
a
be
good
really
place.
quick. I found in my career, baby boomers tend to be academics who love talking about themselves. They really like to make themselves characters in their teaching. I'm a Generation Xer, so I naturally resist that. So I'll be really quick. My background is as faculty, English faculty. So I taught literature, and I also taught multimedia and information technology studies. Since then, and I published on that. I have a lot of fun with that. And if you're interested in Gothic horror, I'm always happy to talk about it. That was my main focus. Since then, I've moved on to work in the field of where technology and education intersect. I worked for a nonprofit for about 14 years that was itself bound up with about 150, 170 small liberal arts colleges. And those I worked with quite closely to help them understand and deal with emerging technologies and how they change teaching, learning, and research. Last year, I set out for myself as an independent consultant in business, and I've been doing that pretty energetically and successfully for the past year and a quarter. I write a lot. As Steve mentioned, I blog. I work on the Horizon Report. I do a monthly newsletter on emerging trends in technology and education, which I'll be happy to speak about. The trends, not so much the newsletter. I have a book out on digital storytelling. I'm shopping around a book contract right now for a new book on the future of education. And if you're curious, I live up here in Vermont, up in the Green Mountains, half off the grid, a tiny house with an energetic family. So that's enough about me. I do work with a lot of different audiences, deans, faculty, presidents, IT leaders, talking about technology, education, the future. So let's go to your questions. I don't want to lecture right now. I just want to hear what you guys are thinking of. And Michelle, do you want to paraphrase
No
or read
questions
some?
coming in, but I know that Steve has picked up a couple from our colleagues. So let him start, and then I'll keep an eye on the box.
Please, Steve.
Sure. I have a question from Matthew Schwartz. Technology has created major changes in education, especially with the accessibility and the portability of academic programs and coursework. How can we as leaders ensure that online and blended coursework are held to the same academic standards as traditional instructor-led courses?
Well, that's a great question. Um, and Matthew, I really hope you can hear me. And if you'd like to jump in on the chat box, please say some more. Um, One of the reasons this is a great question is that it's a question that has some history to it. In the 1990s is when began the current wave of online education and the migration of a lot of academic life to the digital world. And the quality question has been with us the entire time. And when I say it's a historical question, I mean that in a few ways. One is that we've been working on this, we've been practicing it since the 1990s. But the second is we often inherit attitudes and practices. For example, this January I met with a dean from a college. She made me swear I wouldn't reveal the name of the school. The faculty there just decided that it would be okay to allow their faculty to publish online. This is in 2014. And the reason was because the faculty of this college, en masse, said there is no peer review online. And I explained to her that the technical term from computer science to describe that statement is bullshit. And she said, yes, I know, this is quite true, but they were really convinced of it. That is, when I was saying bullshit, they had peer review journals in the 1990s. And we already have huge swaths of peer review journals. And in fact, the major battle going on now in the scholarly publishing world is between proprietary publishers and the advocates of open source, open access scholarly publication about just how best to advance the cause of peer review quality publication. So yeah, we inherit some of these practices. But then in a third sense, there are some historical problems here that we haven't yet solved. We take a look at a lot of online education, and it seems to be not quite as good as the best of face-to-face. And when often we compare online to offline education, it's often an uneven comparison. We tend to privilege a kind of glorious notion of face-to-face learning. Do you guys know Andrew Delbanco's book, College? Came out last year? If you haven't seen it, I
I'm not familiar
recommend
with
it.
it. Yeah.
Well, I do recommend it. It's a beautifully written book, and it's short, and it's also very well researched and quite passionate, and it's been widely talked about. And his defense of college as he thinks it should be is basically Harvard and Princeton, and that's his model. And in that model, he assumes that college means primarily the humanities classroom, specifically the humanities seminar. This is an extremely smart guy, a brilliant historian and scholar, and yet the huge diversity of higher education in its curricular spread and its institutional variety, he just collapses right down to this kind of icon. And it's one that he's conscious of but can't get away from. And that's what he compares to online education, which is massively unfair. Again and again, I've heard people say, well, I can't get that kind of wonderful, intimate experience that I got in the face-to-face classroom online. Okay, fine, but did you ever have a less than wonderful class? Oh, sure. Did you ever have a class where it was intimate in an unpleasant way? Oh, sure. I mean, everybody can name terrible classes and terrible pedagogies, but that's not what we usually compare them to. Anyway, it's possible that if we have a baseline or a median level of quality, if we could do that for face-to-face learning and online learning and compare the two, it's possible that the median online learning will be down a couple of pegs. It won't be quite as good. And it might take some years for it to really reach that level of equality. It might take the development of new technologies, such as affective computing. It might take just the further iteration and refinement of technologies like video conferencing. And it also may just take people getting used to some of these technologies. On the other hand, it might not. It might remain as online education might remain as higher education's lesser cousin, in which case it may prosper and succeed based on the ability to save costs. That's a really long answer to your excellent question, Matthew. There's one thing I didn't talk about, which we probably should, which is accreditation. Accreditation is a way that, in theory, universities and colleges keep themselves on the up and up. And they work really hard at that. Accreditation processes take up a huge amount of bandwidth for a college or university. and they don't, and they take them seriously. But they don't seem, we don't seem to have the same kind of level of scrutiny for online education. Moreover, there's a lot of controversy that accreditation is really good at conserving education, but very
Hmm.
poor at supporting innovation. All right, Matthew, I've gone on too long for a terrific question. If
I
I
have
missed
another
something
one
in your
for
question,
you.
please type it up.
All right,
Go
so we
ahead,
have
Michelle.
another one coming in here, Brian. I have all kinds of thoughts about what you just said, but it's not my turn tonight, so I'm going to try to just bite my tongue. So this is from Bill or William Angrove. He says, at Sam Houston State University Online, I outsource everything to the cloud that I can, including the Blackboard Learning Management System. Video hosting by Kaltura, that's spelled with a K. Go to meeting,
Mm-hmm.
go to webinar, and go to assist and more. This is because our IT department is too slow to provide the service we need. Gee, we've never had that problem, have we, Will? What do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right, and you describe a sad reality. I mean, we have a, it's a complex reality, to be fair. We have a lot of issues that feed into this. Um, I have seen what you talk about on almost every single campus that I've worked with, and I've worked with hundreds over the past decade. I've worked with Research One universities, I've worked with community colleges, I've worked with state schools, liberal arts colleges, and every single one of them has faculty who say, I want to try X, Y, and Z. I know they work. I've seen them in practice, and the IT department says, no, we can't do it. And there are all kinds of reasons. And the reasons sometimes boil down to security, where the IT department is really nervous about compromising security, or even the perception of being compromised. Another is IT department resources, be they bandwidth, which is always, not always, is often a controlled scarce commodity, be they human resources, the ability to get enough people to support these efforts. There's also IP issues, sorry, intellectual property issues. Um, and those can be related to students' intellectual property. They can be related to HIPAA. You guys have talked about HIPAA, right? The Iowa Privacy Act.
Sure, sure.
We probably
Oh,
talk more about FERPA over the lifetime of the program in terms of what
then,
students do,
then
because the
FERPA.
majority of our
Excellent.
folks are in K-12 and or higher ed where they're dealing with FERPA issues. And then we do have a certain group of medical educators and clinician
Mm-hmm.
types who deal with HIPAA. But the majority
Okay.
of our
Well,
folks are FERPA aware. And
FERPA is the real scary one.
mhm.
I mean, I've known campuses whose lawyers told them not to use cloud computing in any way because it would compromise FERPA. For example, if you had your students set up a blog on, Blogger.com or WordPress or wherever, I have heard of counselors, lawyers who said you can't do that because FERPA says you cannot share student information, student private information, and their very name constitutes a violation of privacy. So if you have William Deal and say, William, I need you to sign up, and your blog is called williamdeal.blogspot.com, then the lawyer will be all over you. So I do know one brilliant, brilliant professor who used to be at Occidental College and is now the Modern Language Association's Director of Scholarly Communication, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, who actually mandated that her students go online using pseudonyms. And she actually tracked them and had to have a separate list of their nicknames.
Wow.
I think this is an overinterpretation of FERPA, but a
Mhm.
lot of these lawyers aren't paid to be creative about the intersection of law and technology. Um, Another issue is scale. A lot of IT departments are rewarded by metrics that are based on massive scale. So if they, what do you guys use for this class? For a course management system? Do you have a
Blackboard.
Moodle or okay? And I can hear the love and respect coming off of
Yeah.
you in waves when you say that, Michelle. Blackboard reminds me of Windows. There are lots of users and no fans. The but when you
That's very funny.
but but one of the reasons why Blackboard works, or one of the secret reasons why Blackboard works, is because if you put a class in Blackboard or Moodle or Sakai or Desire to Learn, all the others, you can then defend yourself against copyright infringement by falling under the aegis of the Teach Act. That's capital T, capital E, capital A, capital C, capital H. That is a 2000 law, which is the only educational defense law for digital materials. And it says that if you can basically, if you can replicate online the face-to-face environment digitally, then you can defend yourself in case you're sued. So you might remember the day back in the day when you would wheel in a VCR and put in a cassette and play it for your class, and only the class and you could see it, right? Well, that's kind of the digital equivalent of something like Blackboard. But that's not what I'm talking about. The reason I'm talking about it is because of scale. If an IT department rolls out a tool like Blackboard, and they can say 50% of our faculty are using it, 60% of our classes are in it, that looks terrific to a chief financial officer. That looks really good to trustees or some deans and presidents because it's numbers. It's terrific. You know, you're saying here's this wild technology, and I've got the majority of faculty using it. That's a home run. If, on the other hand, you want to talk about I'll use a new technology. I'll use a game in my class, and or I will use Skype to bring in scholars from abroad, that kind of thing. And it's only one or two faculty out of 400. The IT department doesn't have a lot of incentive to devote resources to that, even if the resources are as paltry as not getting in your way. So what I find, and this is probably what you do in your own practice, is lots of faculty just simply skip their IT department completely and set up shop elsewhere using pseudonyms. If you go to the academic blogosphere, there are tons and tons of blogs in every academic field. I mean, it's remarkable right now. It's a tremendous gold mine of information and knowledge. And most of them are not from .edu domains. They're from .coms, .nets, because professors at colleges will just skip them. The most famous conservative political blogger right now, Glenn Reynolds, for example, is a major professor of law at Tennessee. Wow.
Sorry, I'm
Was
getting a
that?
call from California. I'll step off.
No, it's okay. I thought that was something about Glenn Reynolds. But his website is
No.
instapundit.com. Not the school. No, I think this is a great question, and I think you're really seeing academic practice split between IT support on campus and IT support elsewhere, in the cloud or through third parties.
Hi, it's Steve Bryan. I have a question from Susan Mosier. How important is it that young students K5 learn or exposed to the fun of learning code?
It's really important. It's really important. And my favorite tool for doing that is Scratch. I hope you've seen that.
Sure.
Scratch.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a great. No, I think Ian Bogost, the game designer, Georgia Tech academic, and very prolific researcher, has argued that computer coders right now are in an analogous position to where print literate people were 1,000 years ago. That is, maybe 1 or 2% of our population can actually write and read code. And that's kind of similar to, say, where Europe was around the year 1000 or 1100 in terms of print literacy. And he argued, well, the coming of literacy in print was a great boon for civilization. Well, we should do the same with code. And the earlier the better, simply because the habits of coding, the conceptual habits, not the specific language details of Python or PHP, but the concepts really are strange to most people, and getting them in as early as possible, I think, is a great thing. I've talked with some colleges and universities where they have been arguing about should they require a course in computation, a course in coding of every student. And I think that's a great idea. But doing it at the K through 12 level, the elementary school level, that would be awesome. Oh, bonus thing about that too, if you're teaching coding, is that you don't need to go online to do it. You can do it wholly offline and avoid problems of minors online. And then the online resources for teaching code, like Code Academy, I think should work fine.
Super, thank you. Susan also has a second question. This has to do with funding. Technology in education will at some point in the future be money-saving, right? Shared resources, digital content, professional development online. For now, when funds are very tight in K-12 education, what are the priorities for purchasing? For instance, by the time our school has purchased one-to-one anything, laptops, netbooks, or iPads, it is quite likely that the technology then will be out of date. I'm not sure what my question is here, other than any advice to avoid these frustrations, and what should we do until 2025?
That's a terrific question.
Thank you,
Will all the
Susan.
technology be living on a pair of glasses, right? Um, well, let me ask, Stephen, if you know, are all of these is the whole class? I wish I could just converse with you guys directly. Is the whole class from New York State or from other states?
Hardly. Michelle, you can help me out more on the demographics, but from what I've seen, the classes from different regions of the country, mostly the Northeast, I think, and they're in a variety of professions. A large chunk in K-12, but there's people in corporate, military.
Okay.
Some
Well, it's the
nonprofit.
geography.
Yep. And the
Sure.
geography is definitely national. I think we have one international person in this cohort. The rest are like a one-third Northeast, the rest mainland U.S. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for telling me that. I really appreciate that. I mean, I'm being a very bad rhetorician here. I wish I could immerse myself in all of you guys and in your backgrounds and what your work is before I say more. Um, but I've been asked a question I need to answer. It's a terrific one. The reason I was asking about individual states is because K through 12 funding varies by state. It's obviously, except for a couple of places, not usually done at the state level, but it's locally. But the funding crunch is quite large. There are only a couple of exceptions. California has just started returning some funding to education. I'm not sure how much it will actually appear in K through 12, but the most outrageous example is in North Dakota, which is just pouring money on its education system because of the shale oil boom there. Last year, I was working with a group of legislators and academics from the Midwest, and all of them at North Dakota were complaining about budgets. The North Dakota reps were like, "No, we're great. We thought we'd increase our higher ed spending by 30%." I was like, "Oh, shut up. We don't want to hear about this. This is terrible." Um, but it's true, and it's likely that this will stick around for a while because, first of all, in most American states, the K through 12 population is declining. This is especially true in the Northeast and the Midwest. It's also true in about half of the Southeast, and it's also true in the West. A couple of states are actually increasing the K through 12 population, mostly Texas and Arizona, but otherwise it's dropping, and that's a real problem when it comes to funding, among other things. Another issue is that our economy simply is just not doing that great. We're not growing very quickly, and for public funding, if you're talking about public K through 12, we have so many other very, very urgent demands. And again, this varies by state, but every state has issues which have huge political clout. For example, the prison police system has enormous political clout, and that can be very expensive. And a lot of states, not all, but a lot, have pensions which need to be funded, and that's really an issue. So I think your question is right, and your question is darker than it seems. Um, I don't want to advise a specific hardware platform right now. I do want to recommend software, and what I'd recommend is avoiding single purpose applications whenever possible and pushing stuff to the open web whenever possible. The great thing about the web is that it is so widely accessible that you can play the web on so many different devices. And so if you push your content to that, that helps mitigate the problem of obsolescence. I mean, when Windows 9 comes out, God help us, when it does, it'll still be able to run Internet Explorer 12 or whatever and still hit the web. Now, this won't be true if we build a world in Second Life where only Second Life can play it, for example, and nothing else. When it comes to hardware, I mean, one thing to think about is to think about the specific curriculum you have in mind for your population. For example, I've heard of a bunch of elementary schools. Oh, I should say, sorry. Since some of you are in K through 12, you'll appreciate this. I'm very active in the Vermont school system. I'm on the school board for my town. I'm also on the school board for our district. Um, I'm involved in the statewide issues, and Vermont has some kind of crazy K through 12 politics going on right now. If you're curious, I'd love to talk about it. But so I've been really involved in the back end of that. Um, and one piece that I've been hearing from K through 6, K through 5, is teachers who want their students to have tablets, iPads, or whatever. The reason is they think that the keyboard and mouse, especially the keyboard, is often overkill for kindergarten through third grade. That it doesn't tie in with what they're teaching and can in fact get in the way. But the iPad interface, for example, works just fine and doesn't have the extra layer of requiring textual literacy and typing skills and all that. That's interesting to think about. Just think about the specific curriculum, what you want from those grades. Um, at the same time, I'm hearing from many, many campuses at the college level, I'm hearing from middle schools and high schools that they are dubious of the iPad and tablets in general, because for them, literacy, textual literacy is such a big deal. And while you can create text on an iPad or a tablet, it's a little bit more awkward. It's expensive to get if you buy a keyboard plus the tablet itself. You may as well get a laptop of some kind or a Chromebook. So that literacy issue is different. That curriculum is different. Um, in the classroom itself, my tentative bet is that we're going to see giant slabs of technology begin to become obsolete. I'm talking about the great interactive whiteboards. And the reason is because we're seeing projectors get better and better, and we're also seeing light classroom technology being involved. For example, I just saw a demo for a really neat tool, which is a easel that is basically a sheet of plastic that you stick on the wall, and you can write to it from any device you've got as long as you sign on. So basically it becomes a whiteboard, but it costs, I don't know, $35 or something, and now it's really inexpensive. That's so different from the $10,000 giant, interactive whiteboard. I'm sorry to go on such length. Again, you ask a terrific question, and you really cut to the heart of a lot of the budgetary questions. I do want to emphasize, Susan, and everybody, the web, and sticking to it. That may mean avoiding mobile apps. So be it.
Mm-hmm. I've got a couple more questions coming in. Juanita's been patiently waiting, and then Julia's got one. So let's start with Juanita. She has a statement here. I've been very interested in your opinion of gamification in online classes. Is this a good way to learn in higher education? And if so, where are resources?
That is a great question. And I think we're seeing gamification happen slowly and steadily. It would have happened more quickly, but for the recession. I mean, there are other obstacles to growing gaming and gamification, but that's that's a really big one. I think for a lot of people, they found that from 2008 on, many schools found themselves under horrible financial pressures, and they decided that gaming was something which was non-mission critical. They didn't have to do it as much. I've been working in gaming since 2003, and the guy that I just put up here that I want to recommend to you is a wonderful researcher who more or less single-handedly kicked off the gaming renaissance for learning. This is James Paul G. He's published a series of books. His first book, What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy, really kicked off the whole movement. And it's a really good book. It's short, really accessible. He's a fascinating guy. So I'd like to just point you out to him as a resource. Meanwhile, there are tons of resources out there. I mean, there are many, many books, many, many journals, lots and lots of articles, and almost everybody in gaming and learning is on the web, constantly blogging, podcasting, tweeting. I mean, it's a really vibrant, vibrant field. I just put up here one conference that I recommend, the Games Learning and Society Conference, which has a terrific reputation. It's got some great people involved. Now, when it comes to gamification in particular, I want to make sure that you know kind of the Bible of it. Actually, there are two. One is a terrific book by Jane McGonigal, although it is flawed, but called Reality is Broken. which makes a passionate call for taking game principles and putting them in the real world. If you don't know McGonagall, she's a terrific speaker. She's got a TED Talk on this that I recommend for a start.
That's excellent.
And she's a game designer, and I've played games with her. She's really, really extraordinary because the games she's invented are unusual. She started off in the alternate reality gaming tradition, which if we have time for I can explain, but that's a very, very powerful creative field where games are basically smeared onto everyday life in some interesting ways. The other source to go to is a game designer named Jesse Schell, who gave a terrific talk at the DICE conference a few years ago, where he argued that even if we don't do gamification, that gamification is happening already. He makes a point of analyzing a lot of different game-like interfaces in the world that are being done without gamers or game designers' input. He mentions things, for example, like there's a car that has a virtual plant that rewards your driving. It's not the Prius. It's some of you guys may know it, but it has a virtual pet inside of it that regulates that responds to your driving. He points out air travel in the U.S., which is massively gamified with points and scores and all of this, and so it's already happening out there in the wild, in the world. So these are a few places to go, but there's an awful lot. I published a couple of articles on this. I've got a couple of chapters in gaming in my book on storytelling. In many ways, I think gaming is kind of the quintessential art form, digitally native art form for our time. So I think there's a lot to do with it. The biggest obstacle in teaching and learning, besides the finance issue, and gaming can be as expensive or as cheap as you want, too. It's one of the great things about it. The biggest obstacle is simply teaching teachers' attitudes. I find in many places that faculty will find gaming, they think of it as beneath them. They think it's non-serious. And that's a real issue. I've even heard this from elementary school teachers who will use games, physical games, analog games, if you will. And that's a big edit. And it's an unfortunate attitude because teachers are more or less the only population in North America besides the Amish who haven't figured out gaming. Well, let me stop, Juanita. That's a terrific question, and I wish you the best of it because this is a powerful tool.
All right, I'm gonna pop in Susan.
Can I pause you for a second, Michelle?
Yep, go ahead.
I missed someone's name between Matthew and Susan. There was a terrific question about IT and the cloud, and I can't remember the guy's name who asked it.
IT and cloud was Bill Angrove.
Okay.
Yeah, he's an IT director, so he is responsible to deal with all those deans you were talking about. Julia is asking, any thoughts about using SharePoint as a work tool for companies and organizations that want transparent communication? And she's reminding you and us that everybody in the cohort is not an educator. So SharePoint, I guess, in terms of, I've used it, as primarily for an accreditation report tool, but I know it has much more capability than that.
It has tons of capability. And Julie, I really take your point. Michelle or Steve, can you please tell me what some of the roles are besides educator that are involved in this group?
We have some higher ed folks. We have a senior military leader. We have some nonprofit people. We have.
But they're not doing education in those roles?
I think they are, but maybe I'll open Julia's mic. Hang on, let her speak for herself.
Please.
Julia, here we go.
Hi. I actually spent many years teaching in Vermont.
Where?
And I also was in Brattleboro and also in Woodstock, but mostly in Brattleboro. And I was also a math curriculum person in Brattleboro as well.
Did you hear that this week Brattleboro just went out and failed in their second attempt to hire a town manager?
Yeah, I have a lot of my close friends still live there and family.
Oh, I'd love to talk to you about this. Sorry.
Yeah.
So what do you do now?
I actually work now for the darker side. I work for Measured Progress, which is the test vendor for that was for Vermont, and we'll still probably do some science stuff with you guys. But there are a lot of people, like for example, Giselle. She's a scientist. She's a geologist, and she just spent about 24 hours awake because they had to do all the water testing after the storms in Texas. So, and we also have people that are not, they really aren't, they don't have an education focus. But it doesn't mean that we're not all interested in education. It's just that I'm sensitive to that because I've been in small groups with people and they look at, that this is a really new idea for a lot of people that are not in education.
Well, please, I'm delighted that you drew our attention to this. By us, I mean my attention. And second, because I'm new to your class, and second, if at any point folks have questions that come from being outside of the education role, please don't hesitate to ask. Education sometimes feels kind of like a giant cult. I think the best analogy really is to, I hate to say this, but to healthcare. In terms of its sheer complexity, its enormous size, the big amounts of emotion that we had invested in it, the Byzantine skirt of financing, and so from outside from outside the health sector, you're like, wow, what is this? So please ask questions. I'm happy to. I'm really delighted to make this transparent as possible. In fact, the working title for my book is The Visible College. Julia, you asked about SharePoint. SharePoint is it's so strange. Microsoft used to be this demonic thing, used to be the Darth Vader of IT, and now they're just kind of pathetic and invisible. One of the Google leaders a couple of years ago said, well, there are a handful of companies that are changing the world, but not Microsoft. You say Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and that's it. And it's really interesting that Microsoft has become this really, this sideline thing. And it's tragic in a sense because they're doing some tremendous work, from the very small to the very large. If you guys use video at all, there's a free video editing tool for Windows called Windows Movie Maker. And if you've never made videos before, it's a great first tool. It's easy, it's simple, it works, and it's free. So SharePoint's been going on for a while, and one of the things that Microsoft does so well is they keep iterating and developing tools, and they try really hard to do it, and they grow them. And SharePoint's one of those stories where it is just enormous at this point. It has so many functions and so many tie-ins to other services. I think it's really powerful. The downside of it, well, there's two. One is that your shop has to be a Microsoft shop in a sense, because it's expensive and you have to buy into it, and not all IT shops really want to do that now. And the second, and this is a very different one, is it doesn't work really well in the open. I mean, it's an intranet kind of tool, and so if you want open, you have to go somewhere else. But I think SharePoint for projects, for collaboration, it's got some clunkiness to it, but I think it's much better than it used to be, and I think it has all kinds of success points. So I would definitely run with it, especially if you have a license. I'd keep going with it.
All right, Julie, thanks for the report on Vermont school politics. I also have a friend in Burlington who is a teacher educator over there. And
did she talk to you about their superintendent?
Yeah, I heard that it's for such a small state. Ashwini, I'm opening your mic because I saw your note come in about having a question and not sure it surfaced. So I'm opening your mic. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great.
Good.
So yeah, we'll talk about Burlington in moments. Ashwini, your mic is open. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, my question was, people have like different levels of comfort and ability to learn technology, and sometimes there's a lot of resistance. I see this in my department. I'm not a very tech savvy person, but there are a lot of faculty in my department who are resisting a lot of changes. And some of it is required by accreditation, and our outcomes assessment depends on it. So is there a way to get everybody on the same page?
Ashwini, what department?
Nutrition, food science, and packaging. I teach
great.
at San Jose State University.
Oh, excellent, excellent. I have a couple of friends not too far from you.
Oh, okay.
And it's a lovely area.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And of course, you guys are a famous school in a lot of ways because you guys have contributed so much to the local community and to the Bay Area as a whole.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Well, here are a few different ways of approaching it. One is, do you know Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm theory?
Yeah, I closed our mic because we're having some
Okay.
feedback here. But Ashwini,
Okay.
you're open again.
No, I don't.
I recommend this, and here I'll quickly uh, bring up a graphic from it. If you've heard of early adopters, he's the guy who quantified the term. Here, let me see if I can find a nice image for it. He wrote this book quite some time ago, and the real goal that he was trying to understand was how how an organization adopted technology, and he was looking at for example, companies and when they would decide to use fax machines. And he quantified this and has tested it out, and it's become a real staple of how technology is adopted. So I want to put this curve out there for you because I think this helps explain in many ways when and how people use technology. And here's how this goes. And I'm sure this will seem intuitively obvious to you the minute you see this. So to begin with, if you take a population, 5 to 10% will be early adopters. And these are the kind of crazy people who love the new, who want to try this stuff because it's exciting to them intellectually and perhaps beneficial to them professionally. You have some computer scientists here, but lots of other people. And sometimes they're young, sometimes they're old. It's really hard to predict. And the early adopters are guaranteed to be the ones to drive our IT guy, Ashgrove, crazy. William Angrove, excuse me. Or to drive crazy the IT departments that you're talking about, because they're really they're out on their own. Now, after them, you've got about 80% of your population that will adopt a technology not from the pleasure of it, but because either they feel it gives them an incremental advantage or it helps them avoid an incremental disadvantage. So for the former, they'll start using email, for example, because they think it'll make their life a little bit easier. They'll start using YouTube videos instead of DVDs because it's a little bit simpler. For the second group, they will adopt email because they're starting to seem kind of old-fashioned and it's beginning to show up in student evaluations. Then at the other end of this, the opposite of the early adopter, you have the laggards, the people who foolishly call themselves Luddites. And these are people who will make a fashion out of not adopting technology. Moore points out that you can really trace a technology along this arc based on when it crosses the gap from early adopter to that middle group. And here's the thing. Early adopters are great fun, they're brilliant, they're exciting, and nobody listens to them. They don't influence anybody. They influence each other, and that's it. That middle group listens to itself. So if you've got a bright young nutritionist who says, hey, I just started using this wonderful Flash game, and I think it's really good for teaching about nutrition in the third world, the middle of the road guys will be like, that's nice. Next, and they'll move on. But if the middle of the road, what he calls the early majority or late majority, hears about this, tries it, and then tells their colleague, that's when things go mainstream. That's when things go wide. So one practical bit of advice for you is to really focus on those middle of the road people, not the Luddites. I mean, and just by the way, I don't know if you get this in San Jose, if people use this term, but if they say Luddites, what you do is you say, you're not Luddite, you're Amish. And they'll say, what? What are you talking about? And you say, well, is your livelihood threatened? And they usually say, no. Are you violently upset? Are you actually going to take to violence to resist this technology? And they'll say, no, of course not. We're academics. And you say, well, what you are, you're telling me that the whole world is going the wrong direction with this technology, and you're trying to maintain the old traditions in the face of it, right? That's what the Amish do. And they go, oh, that's pretty good. It's a good way to take the sting out of the stupid Luddite charge. The reason I mock it is because it's historically dumb. It means they don't know who the Luddites were. And for an academic, I find that just inexcusable. Here's a second tip that's actually a lot shorter. I think I hate to generalize like this. I really do. But I'm sure this may apply to many places beyond the Bay Area. There's a strong demographic here. It's easy to generalize about generations and technology, and we can make all kinds of mistakes. I have many seniors who are friends of mine who are wild programmers and wild early adopters. My good friend Howard Rheingold, for example. But And we can point to kids who don't want to use technology. I just heard from a technologist at Marlborough College who said that her students don't want to have cell phone access. Um, but generally speaking, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be fluent and excited about digital technology, and the older, the opposite. And right now, it looks like this is just going to continue for quite some time. And there's tons of evidence backing this up. Many, many polls. The Pew Internet American Life Project has done a lot of great research on this. And so one thing to do is to play the demographic game. Focus your attention on people who are middle-aged and younger. And for the older folks, don't spend too much time on them. I think of this as the Soviet model of change myself. Here's the third one, and then I'll stop because you just asked a tremendous question. The third is you can only focus so much attention, Ashwini, on teaching and learning with technology. Many, many faculty, and when we leave the education sector, many people outside the education sector find their real reward or a lot of their meaning in life from their non-teaching work. I'm speaking, for example, of research in higher education, or service, or, of course, a job has something to do with teaching. And in those cases, you have to speak to that to get people excited. Uh, I've heard of a lot of social scientists, for example, who will tell me they hate using technology in the classroom. And then when I look at their research, it's entirely online. They use all kinds of great discovery tools. They don't touch paper at all. They live in the ebook world, but they've just firewalled their minds. So I'd recommend that they try and cross that firewall. Try and say, well, this is working for you. Maybe you should teach your students how to use that great e-discovery tool or those great ebooks. So let me pause there, Ashwini, but that's a terrific question.
Great. So I'm watching the clock here. We have time for kind of a couple more, maybe one more from our colleague group. And while they're coming up with one, if there is another. Steve, do you want to jump in back in and check in with us?
Sure, sure. Brian, I'm going to actually ask a question that's very close to my work in my school district. I've been in my district, this is my 15th year, and we've gone back and forth on the importance of technology planning. When I first got there 15 years ago, and even 20 years ago, I guess the birth of the E-rate, it was important that every district had a technology plan, but then that really fell off the map, and it seems like there's a push in a lot of districts. Maybe the Common Core is partly driving this, but to really come back to a centralized technology plan. And I just was wondering on your thoughts on this. Is this a any kind of unified national trend that you're seeing, or just a local initiative that we're?
No, I'm hearing a lot. I'm hearing a lot of this at the K through 12 level, and I think a lot of it is driven by finances, simply. And there's kind of a, and William Angrove can speak to this, but there's an economic logic to centralization. You can try and achieve economies of scale at a greater level with that kind of central planning. On top of this, I think I agree. Common Core is playing a role. But so also is the whole setup of testing from No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. A lot of that has to be centralized in order to work, and that's another driver of this. One thing to keep in mind, though, and this is hard, I think, for any organization, and especially true of schools, but it's true of others as well, that they have to remember that the people they work with will at some point live outside of their institutional walls. So we're talking about SharePoint, for example, a really good tool, you can use that. But your learners will also be Googling stuff. They'll be finding YouTube videos, this other videos other than the ones that are shared in class. And it's really, really important to teach kids and grown-ups the skills of living in the wild. I mean that we can have all of our customers, our patrons, our students living far too much in the walled garden, And even a walled garden tool like the iPhone iOS store still is only part of the world. So it's really important, I think, when we're planning purchasing and licensing to make sure that we plan for pedagogy. For teaching in the wild world, this is a great book. I mentioned Howard Wrangled before. This is a lot of fun. Howard devised this by working. He was teaching part-time at Stanford and at Berkeley, and he was trying out all kinds of wild techniques on students there. And then he's also been running a whole bunch of online classes that he teaches himself. And so this book comes with a lot of really great practice and lots of really practical, hard-headed advice. This is one of the most prominent discussions of the term email apnea, for example. And because Howard lives in the Bay Area, naturally he has to include some stuff about meditation, which is fine. But yeah, I think this is a key part. You want to make sure that your students are prepared for the Wild West as well as the civilized East, William.
Yeah, I'm a native San Franciscan. I resemble that remark.
Yes, you
So,
do.
Steve, I'm glad you got to come back in. I'm also going to ask Will Deal if he wants to make a bit of a closing comment before we close. And while Will is getting ready for that, I'm missed Gina's remark because it came in the middle of a few others. She's remarking back on the reach of education to other fields in our cohort, particularly. She says, I worked as a university program director and taught there for 5 years, but I see many correlations between the Blackboard online learning and education and corporate training learning systems. Concepts of adult learning are the same, so all the technology in education is valid for all of us. So I guess she's seeing the crossover between formal organized education and other types of corporate training as being fairly porous.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover, and I find more than a few IT shops in academia are staffed with people who worked on corporate training and vice versa. And in fact, corporate training often pioneers things that academia gets later on. Learning objects, for example, was something that academia just toyed with, but became massive in the Department of Defense and became really important in a lot of companies. When we look at standards like the Common Cartridge Standard, it's really corporate learning that drives that much more than higher education. I didn't see a question in that, Michelle, but I think it's a really accurate observation to make.
Yeah, well, she had weighed in a little earlier when it was more on time, and I got to it late. So,
Oh no, it's
in
fine. I
terms
mean,
of reaching across, yeah,
look, I mean,
excellent.
I find it's crazy to assume that discussions will follow a
Yeah,
very precise linear path.
absolutely. And the people have been very generous and gracious about moving in and out. So, Will has signed off. Thank you, Brian. I need to say good evening. He has another event to attend, and
Understood.
Steve's had a chance to weigh in. So, I will just appreciate so much that you came back to our group and wish you luck in the wilds of Vermont with school district politics and all that entails. I will encourage Steve to field any questions that come out of people's brain when they wake up in the morning and think, I should have asked that question. They can forward those to Steve and he can cobble a few together and pass them on.
Sure.
You can also fling them at me through Twitter. I mean,
Yeah, I'm seeing
I'm
this
on
whole
Twitter.
Twitter thing, and I will admit to being a non-Twitter user, and I'm going to give it a try.
Do you use Facebook, Michelle?
I made a Facebook page so I could say I know how to do it, but I'm not a regular user.
Do you use Google Plus?
No.
And back in the day, or maybe now, did you ever get creative with the tag on your instant message handle?
No. Closest I get to I am is I have two teenagers. So.
No, but your name says Michelle, and then you have a tag that says like sleeping or making food or something.
Right. No, I don't know anything about that.
Well, those little tags are kind of
Uh-huh.
like the ancestor of Twitter.
All right. Well, I know about the
Well,
bird, and I read other people's tweets, so I'm ready to take the next level here and take
it's
it up. So,
it's remarkably easy.
yeah.
That's one of the great things about it. Listen, let me. Can I just say a word before we go?
Sure, you can have the last word, and then we'll close up.
Um, I've been developing a practice for the past couple of years, and I've been developing this with other people, and been doing this with groups as diverse as California State University librarians and the IT staff at Bucknell, and it's a fun practice. And I'd like to commend it to you and see what you guys make of it. And here's what you do: you look back over the past month. And I pick month as a kind of arbitrary time, just to see. And what you should do is pick out a story that to you seems like it suggests something that's going to happen in the future. And by that I mean either something that you read about or consume by media, or something you experience. So, for example, for a story, it could be, um, well, here, this is the thing I was just looking at earlier. Um, under the header of wearable computing, one vision of that, if you'll excuse the pun, has been having computation built into a contact lens, either directly or as a projection. So I look at this story, and this suggests to me something that we need to, forgive me for saying so, keep an eye on, because this kind of change in where computation lives is significant. So I would note this, and I say, here's this news story, and I think it indicates this trend about wearable computing. But the other thing you can do is look at something that happens in your life. When I ask people to do this, often someone will say, I saw a little child with an iPhone or an iPad, and they took to it immediately. And do you know that's what you may be seeing there is the death knell of the keyboard and mouse. What you may be seeing is this total transformation of our computational interfaces into something that's really tangible and fluid. So for yourselves, in your work, if you're in IT, if you're in the military, if you're in the corporate dark side, if you're in the corporate light side, if you're in the nonprofit world, K through 12 higher ed, whichever, think about your month or look ahead and try and pick out something that to you seems futuristic, something that may just point to the future. It's a good practice to do. And if you share such observations with friends, you can start to build a map of what might be coming up down the road. That's all. So this is a sign of a bad teacher. I can't let you go without giving you a
Yeah,
homework, right?
give them an assignment.
Let me.
All right.
I want to thank you all for your time, for your thoughtful questions. I said to you, Matt, William, Susan, Juanito, Yulia, Ashwini, and Gina, and more. Thank you so much for your thoughts, and good luck with the rest of this class.
All right. Thank you so much. Steve and I thank you. We'll be signing off and following up.
Michelle, thank you for helping out so much, and Stephen, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate your time and insights. Excellent.
All right. Good night,
Another great
everybody.
session.
All right. Take care. This recording will be available on your course by tomorrow.